Okay, folks, let's get started. Finance Committee meeting. We're already a little bit behind, so we're gonna. This is just a warning, Neil. I'm just saying we're gonna get started soon. We're already behind, so I'm just giving people a heads up that we're gonna get this ball rolling. Commissioner Schwartz today for Chairman Schwartz today. So, if you like how today goes. I've got nothing else to do, so, just kidding. All right, let's call the meeting to order. David, are there any public speakers?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, there are 4 public speakers today. The first speaker is Jason Pinero, followed by Andrew Pollack.
Excellent.
Finally, some peace around here after what we witnessed this morning. Sarah, for the record, I sent you via Twitter the flyer that you mentioned during transit. So that's for the record. But other than that, Bob Ferran, I saw your performance doing the city council speaker, and I was saying epic fail. I said epic fail. I'm not Mary Bonin, by the way. But Bob, to be honest with you, your performance in doing that hearing wasn't that good. My sense was you wasn't prepared. And when the city comes to give us money, they're not joking. And I wonder if our 2020-2024 capital plan will start on time, not 18 months later than the previous one. Because, when the city and state come together and give us the money, and we're not ready, that means that we're having problems. So that's all I have to say. And Neil, I sent you a tweet regarding AJT. I hope that you keep your promise like you always do. See ya later on CPOC.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Andrew Pollack, who will be followed by Christopher DeGrice.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman, members of the board. Very quickly, I want to commend Commissioner Vanterpool. The job she took in Delaware is very close to my heart because I have property on the eastern shore of Maryland, and it's going to be interesting to see how the roads in Delaware are going to look, especially Coastal Highway, which is Route 1. But here today to talk about something serious on the Long Island Railroad that's been taking place since the last week. Maybe this was Monday, maybe this was Tuesday, but I know this was definitely Tuesday. Last Tuesday, I took the 1042 westbound train from New Hyde Park to Penn. All right, I was originally happy we were skipping local stations. I will admit, I'm allowed to be a hypocrite, but now I've noticed one thing. This has been a pattern for the past week where these trains that are supposed to stop at Kew Gardens, Forest Hills, and Woodside are skipping the stations. And this morning, I'll quickly mention, I get an email about, we're skipping stations. Here's what the email said, if I can even pull it up. Here's what it says. It doesn't say any reason why the trains were skipping. Is it temporary platforms being installed? Is it track work that wasn't planned ahead? There should be more transparency. I don't know what's going on around here. This makes me very suspicious. So I'm wondering, is there any elaborate reason why trains are not making local stops? Because I can't understand this, especially how this is off-peak. There's a lot of people during weekdays who use local stations, especially how I live in Queens, and this just makes me upset. So before my time wraps up, I just want to wish everybody a very happy holiday, and I will see you all on January 21st.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Christopher DeGrice, and followed by Deborah Greif.
I like that last name better than Grief. Good afternoon, everyone. As I said before, I'm Christopher D. Greif. I am a New York City Transit Riders Council member and Long Island Railroad ADA Task Force and Accessibility. One thing that I'm also on the looking at the My MTA app. If you go on your phone or go on your computers, there's a little typo on the app. It says when you want to check your train, let's say I'm starting from Suffolk County somewhere out in the Montauk branch, and I want to go from there to Atlantic Brooklyn. It will say for the half fare in zone 13, whatever zone, 1175. But when I click on it, it shows me peak and off-peak hours. So there is a lot of confusion, and I think we need to make it clear for the website. If it's not going to be accepted on the reduced fare during the rush hour time, which I'm using the regular word rush hour, then it should be clear that this is only available off rush hour times and weekends, because this does confuse a lot of the railroad conductors and any crew and any ambassadors, so we can try to keep the trains and keep the payment correctly. Because on my MTA app, it does have a double header, peak and off-peak. And I really want to hope that our finance will be also working on with the Long Island Railroad and Metro North to make sure when we do study the Omni future, let's keep the Omni card. Make sure that we are training every customer along the Long Island Railroad because they're used to those beautiful tickets. And I do want to wish everyone a happy, healthy holiday. And I still love the finance because I love the forecasts, because at least you break it down very much for me as well as my fellow advocates and people with disability. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Deborah Greif.
Good afternoon. Thank you for saying my name right. I appreciate it very much. What I would like, as you can see, now you can obviously see my disability because you see me using my walker. But I'm you see, when I go on the New York City transit, whether it's buses, trains, I'm half fare. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts. I don't think it's fair that during peak for the Long Island Railroad as well as Metro North that I am not allowed to go at half fare. I am not wealthy. I am like many people with disabilities, we're either on SSI or SSDI. We don't get a lot, we don't have a lot of money, and it is a financial burden. It is very hard. If I want to visit a couple of people that I'm very close to who are living in Connecticut, upstate, and then if I want to go out to Long Island, if I want to if I don't want to have to pay the full fare, I would have to leave like 3:34 in the morning from near Montauk Point. That's really not fair. It will already affects me with my disability, but it's not fair. I don't have the financial means. So there's too many people that are like me. So I'd really hope that this finance committee can change the fare structure for the Long Island Railroad as well as Metro North. Thank you, and happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you. That concludes the public speaking session.
Thank you. Next, I want to move to approval of the minutes from the November 12th Finance Committee meeting. May I have a motion? Second? All in favor? Thank you. The November 12th minutes are approved. David, can you take us through the work plan?
Certainly. For your review, there's a draft of the 2020 Finance Committee work plan on page 12. If any board member would like to suggest any additions, deletions, or other edits to the work plan, we can incorporate them at next month's meeting. There is no Budget Watch presentation in December. Bob Foran will present the 2020 budget and financial plan 2020-2023 adoption materials later in this meeting. A 2019 year-end flash Budget Watch will be presented in January. Next is Finance Watch. It can be found in section 5, page 20, and Pat McCoy is here to take us through it.
All right, I just have a few transactions to report on quickly. First is 200 million TBTA General Revenue Bonds 2019C. This was a new money bond transaction that was priced through competitive bid on November 26th. It closed successfully on December 3rd, and proceeds will be used to finance existing approved bridge and tunnel capital projects, including 20 to 24 TBTA capital program projects. The winning bid was provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch. These are fixed-rate bonds with an all-in true interest cost of 3.04% and a final maturity of November 15th, 2048. And next, up for a competitive bid on the same day was 46 million of TBTA General Revenue Variable Rate Bonds. This is subseries 2003 B2. These were bonds that needed to be remarketed in a term rate mode as floating rate tender notes with the purchase date of November 15th, 2024. The final bid was an interest rate of SIFMA plus 25 basis points, or 1/4%, and Citigroup submitted that winning bid. Next, we had $200 million of MTA transportation revenue bond and transportation revenue bonds, 2019F, on December 4th. Proceeds will be used to, these are notes, they will finance existing approved transit and commuter projects. This was competitive issue. The winning bid was submitted by Bank of America Merrill Lynch. The notes have a maturity of November 15th, 22, and they have an all-in true interest cost of 1.451%. Lastly, we executed a 2.8 million gallon ULSD fuel hedge. Goldman Sachs, J. Aaron, was the winning bidder at an all-in price of $1.86 per gallon, and that was also on November 26th. Last part of Finance Watch, we do have some upcoming transactions. I'll just quickly highlight those. We have a remarketing of $75 million of transportation revenue variable rate refunding bonds, 2012 G3. These are currently outstanding as floating rate notes, and we'll reissue them again as floating rate notes using SIFMA as the relevant index, and we are looking for a 5-year term on that. And these are all January transactions, by the way. Also in January, we'll place into the market a fixed rate bond issue, which will pay off an outstanding $750 million ban that's coming due on February 3rd, together with the 2016 C2B bonds. This transaction in totality will be just over $1 billion and will be priced through a competitive method of sale in mid-January. 2 more transactions in January. We have $102 million of TBTA general revenue variable rate bonds 2005A. These need to be remarketed, and we've identified Barclays Bank as the bank that will provide a letter of credit, so we'll keep these out as variable rate demand bonds. And that will close that transaction before January 28th, when the existing letter of credit expires by its terms. Lastly, we do have new bond anticipation notes coming up that we'll need to issue to keep up with our cash flow needs for bond finance portion of the capital program. We will be looking at issuing $800 million of notes for existing approved MTA funded projects and $700 million of notes for existing approved New York State projects from the 15 to 19 capital program. And we're looking to close this collective issue on January 9th. So that's, we've got our work cut out for us in January, and that's our schedule for now. Any questions or comments? Okay, thank you.
Next are MTHQ and all agency items. There are 7 action items today. The first is the Henry Hudson Bridge and Cross Bay Veterans Memorial Bridge resident rebate programs for Bronx residents and Queens residents, respectively. Peg Terry here is here to take any questions.
Any questions? Commissioner Albert.
So I understand what this is all about. Does this mean existing Queens and Bronx Easy Pass holders will have to get new Easy Passes to identify that they are residents of those boroughs in order for them to get these rebates?
Commissioner, you are correct. They will have to sign up for new resident Easy Pass plans with tags associated with the resident Easy Pass plans. We estimate that there are about 800,000 account holders who are eligible for the rebate programs. And we've had no reason before now to ensure that they are using the correct address or have provided proof of residence. And one of the reasons we're asking for early approval is so that we can begin the outreach so that they can determine, establish their eligibility for the programs.
And I understand the MTA will be obviously made whole for this discount. The schedule for receiving these monies from the Outer Borough Fund, has that been established yet?
This is a waterfall fund. The money goes first into the Subway Action Plan, and maybe somebody else should talk about how the money, but I know the money then flows into the account.
So the money comes first to the MTA for the Subway Action Plan. And again, that is to maintain the effort that has taken place up to this point. It's about 362 in the first year, but ongoing it'll be about $301 million. The next $50 million will go to fund outer borough transportation projects.
Yeah.
The one that's identified right now is for Henry Hudson and the Cross Bay Bridge rebate. Now, it will take about through the middle of August for us to receive all of the money that we need for the subway action plan. So then the next dollars that come in will be available for these two rebates. So in the first year at least, probably going forward, we will be advancing funds so that these rebates will be available beginning on January 1 of each year. And then we'll reimburse ourselves with the monies as they come in. But that is a point that we will, because it's a flow of funds, we will be advancing those funds.
And we're talking, I assume, after congestion pricing begins in January of 2021.
We're receiving monies right now.
But not from congestion pricing.
Not from the this is congestion pricing 1.
Right.
Remember, this is
The
this is
original
for
one.
hire, yes,
Oh.
for hire vehicle.
Yep, yep.
So congestion pricing 2 will be central business district tolling.
Okay, thanks.
I just asked a question. This may not be material. Have we estimated what the sort of management costs of shifting 800,000 people into a new Easy Pass, and will we be reimbursed for that?
The statute provides that the cost of implementing the program will be
So it
covered
will
by the
cover.
outer borough transportation account. I do not know if we have an estimate of those costs at
Okay.
this time. The current customer service center manages the rebate programs for at the Cross Bay for Rockaway residents and residents of Broad Channel, and the 2 Verrazano rebate programs.
With apologies to those of you who are at Bridge and Tunnel, I'm going to repeat my comments. I am vehemently opposed to this rebate program. I think as a transit and toll authority, it is antithetical for us to provide rebates. I recognize that this is not a function of the MTA. I recognize this is an outcome of legislation that was drafted at the pressure of some particular legislators. So this is a political outcome. And it just further reinforces the unfortunate power of the car constituency, sometimes at the demise of our transit constituency, who is often less empowered. And for $13.6 million, the MTA can find better ways of improving service for Bronx and Queens residents. So I do not think that we should be in the business of this. Again, I fully am aware of the legislation and the statute. I understand that we would be capped and reimbursed, and this is not, the MTA must execute this as per the legislation. My gripe.
Commissioner, may I interrupt you at that one?
Sure.
In the interim between the end of the TBTA committee meeting and now, we have looked at the statute and at the memo reflecting the agreement between legislative leaders and the governor, and I gave you incorrect information at the committee meeting. Based on the statute and the memo, the board does have discretion in voting on the rebate programs. If you want me to go into the statutory and memo analysis, in the statute it has mandatory language about the money has to be used, for the 4 outer boroughs and for MTA facilities and services. But when it comes to discussing the rebate programs, it uses discretionary language. It says funds may also be used to fund a toll reduction program on facilities operated by MTA or TBTA. And then the April 5th, 2019 memo reflecting the agreement between legislative leaders and the governors uses similar discretionary language. It says, after consultation with the houses of the legislature, below is our understanding of the potential uses of the outer borough transportation account for 2020, and then it goes on to list, 3 or 4 programs or services in addition to the rebate programs.
Thank you for that clarification and for the expediency with which you've gotten that information. So with that, I would implore my colleagues to reconsider supporting this. Again, we are a transit and toll authority. We are not and should not be in the business of providing rebates to those that just takes away ultimately or potentially from the revenue that we are making, even though there are caps recommended to be put in place, and this is money that was coming from this account. I think that, again, there are other ways for us to improve transit for Queens and Bronx residents that in perpetuity and that continue to build upon the investments that we make. And $13.6 million can be applied that way. So I would implore my colleagues to consider this as we vote.
Thank you. I wanted to share that in the Bridge and Tunnel Committee meeting, where, as Commissioner Vanderpool indicated, she made similar remarks, and Commissioner Lynn, I think, made similar remarks. I think that we're getting the information a bit piecemeal, and I would like to request that perhaps the board could get some kind of legal memo tomorrow from the General Counsel with the input of the CFO and lay out for us exactly what the origin of this is and what the options are for the board, and then perhaps just deal with it at the full board meeting on Wednesday.
I think that makes sense.
If that's a motion, I'll second it.
And I support that as well.
All right. Okay. David, why don't we go to the next 5 action items?
The next 5 action items will be introduced by Pat McCoy.
Okay, these action items, the staff summaries are in the main book, but all the resolutions are in the exhibit book because they were so voluminous. I'll begin with the first action item in the first staff summary. It's the authorization to issue new money bond anticipation notes and/or bonds in an aggregate amount of $4.275 billion for the 2020 year. This is the anticipated need for our fiscal year beginning January 1st. The amount necessary for transit and commuter purposes is $3.75 billion, and the amount for MTA bridges and tunnels is $525 million. And this is related to the analysis in the November financial plan. So the debt needs in that plan are what you see here. The exhibit package on director's desk includes supplemental ban and bond resolutions for the transportation revenue bond credit and the dedicated tax fund credit with an aggregate amount of $3.75 billion for existing approved transit and commuter projects. And the exhibit package for TBTA includes a supplemental ban and bond resolutions for both the senior and the subordinate TBTA resolution in an aggregate amount of $525 million. And just one note, because the board has approved Bridges and Tunnels 20 to 24 capital program, no further approval is necessary. Those TBTA proceeds will be available for spending on all capital projects. And it's just the case of transit and commuter that we still are waiting for the approval of the 20 to 24 program before that money can be spent on those projects. Do you want me to keep going with each?
Great, yep. Please,
okay, the next resolution, the second action item, I should say, is approval of the authorization to undertake refundings of outstanding bonds from time to time in 2020 that meet the board authorized refunding policy as applicable. The document package includes supplemental refunding resolutions for each of our active credits, transportation revenue bonds, dedicated tax fund bonds, and both TBTA senior and subordinate bonds. Third, we are seeking authorization of the Hudson Rail Yards refunding trust obligations resolution, which is being sought to allow for a refunding of a portion of outstanding Hudson Rail Yards bonds for savings. Fourth, we have a resolution to create a new TBTA CBDTP second subordinate bond resolution, which will be used to interim finance the costs related to the design, build, installation of infrastructure, tolling systems, and allowable implementation expenses necessary for the operation of the Central Business District tolling program. And it's the intent to issue notes or short-term instruments based on this new resolution, and then once the program is up and running, the actual toll money in the Central Business District lockbox would reimburse or pay off, I should say, those obligations at that time. The last resolution, the last action item in the package is approval being sought for the reimbursement resolutions which are necessary to preserve MTA and TBTA, their ability to use a tax-exempt ban or bond proceeds to reimburse costs, eligible costs, that would have been initially funded with other resources, and that's just to ensure that we maintain as maximum tax exemption as possible for our capital spending. So those are the 5 resolutions. There's obviously a lot there. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions? All right, I need a motion, please. Second? All in favor? Thank you. David?
The last action item is the MTA's 2020 budget and 2020-2023 financial plan adoption materials. They can be found starting on page 265 of the Director's Desk exhibit book and on the MTA website, and Bob Foran is here to present it.
Thank you. Each of you should have either a hard copy of the adoption materials, or as David said, they're in the exhibits. The financial plan and the 2020 budget will be adopted at the board meeting. It's presented at this time for information purposes, for discussion and public consideration, but the actual vote will be a board vote on Wednesday. I'm going to go through the staff summary because I need to hit certain items there. The MTA board is required to adopt a balanced budget. The purpose of the staff summary before you is to secure MTA board adoption of the accompanying 2020 financial proposed budget and the 4-year financial plan 2020 to 2023, which includes the 2019 November forecast and plan adjustments, those are things below the lines, and authorization of budget and plan adjustments, including MTA policy decisions as set forth in the staff summary. The document summarizes the November plan presented to the board for information purposes only at the November board meeting. It projected ending cash balances of $143 million in 2019, $11 million in 2020, $33 million in 2021, with projected cash deficits of $212 million in 2022 and $426 million in 2023. There are only a few changes since the November plan, and I think they have been discussed at prior meetings, committee meetings. There is the elimination of the cashless pilot from the Long Island Railroad plan, 2 things for Metro North, the cancellation of the new parking fee structure, and also a 1-year delay in the Rockland County bus subsidy. Other than that, you can see the items that are in the plan and the highlights beginning on page 1-3. Let's just hit the highlights there. First, this plan implements the transformation plan to streamline MTA's internal processes. There are no budget-driven service cuts. It does maintain prior plan investments for the forward plans and the way ahead plans. It holds the projected fare and toll increases to 4% in 2021 and 2023. We have efforts to reduce fare evasion and projections of $50 million a year. It includes a renegotiation with the City of New York for an equitable sharing of paratransit cost. It captures savings from the elimination of vacant administrative positions. There is cost avoidance through fiscal constraints placed on controllable overtime. We are addressing new maintenance requirements, Metro North and MTA bus fleets, the hiring of additional MTA police officers, fortifying technology networks with additional investments, and a continuing effort to achieve annually recurring savings targets. It is the recommendation that the board adopt the 2020 final proposed budget and 4-year financial plan, which includes approving the 2019 November forecast and plan adjustments. The approval of this plan will supersede prior board plan approvals for this period. Note that the projected 2021 and 2023 fare and toll increase proposals will require separate board actions in advance of those dates. Authorize staff under the guidance and direction of the Chairman, CEO, Chief Financial Officer, or their designees to take actions to implement the policy actions set forth in the plan. Authorize staff to draw down the unexpended 2019 General Reserve in the amount of $165 million, which will be used to help balance the 2020 budget. Authorize technical adjustments to the MTA budgets and forecasts on a non-material nature in the 2020 February plan. Authorize adjustments by MTA budget and forecast to reflect labor settlements approved from time to time by the board. Authorize staff under the guidance and direction of the Chairman, CEO, the Chief Financial Officer, or their designees, including the MTA Treasurer, to take additional budget and cash management actions, as has been done in past budgets, to draw on the general reserve and/or make budget adjustments to respond to unexpected expenses and revenue subsidy shortfalls, and other actions including advancing the bridge and tunnel operating subsidies, using MTA MRT2 corporate account monies, use of the payroll mobility tax and replacement funds and MTA aid, and authorize staff acting under Section 1266-6A of the Public Authorities Law to enter into interagency loan agreements among the MTA and its affiliates and subsidiaries. And we point out that to the extent that we do so, the statute requires that such interagency loans be repaid no later than the end of the next succeeding calendar year. And finally, to use the stabilization reserve and provision for prompt payment of contractual obligations. Now, before I just conclude the comments and take any questions, let me just talk about what we're doing now in terms of labor. As you know, we have a tentative agreement with Transit Workers Union Local 100. It's been approved by their leadership, and it is before the members for ratification. To the extent it is ratified later this month, early next month, it'll then be brought before the MTA board for discussion and for voting. To the extent that the MTA board approves that it is ratified and approved by the MTA board, we would then present back to the board an amended budget for 2020 and the financial plan 2020 to 2023, reflecting the terms of that and also grossing it up to reflect those other unions that are subject to pattern agreement and pattern process. So to the extent we would present that, we would tell you how we were proposing to fund that and give you options. So there will be plenty of time for discussion by the board to consider how we want to address those funding. But I can tell you right now that we believe that the financial plan can accommodate, as it is, in terms of the total envelope, the terms of this for the entire organization. So this concludes my comments on the 2020 final proposed budget and the 2020-2023 financial plan, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I know enormous amounts of work have gone into this. I'm grateful. Any questions or comments? Commissioner
The other thing,
Moran.
I just wanted to Bob, maybe that answers your question and makes you feel comfortable in voting yes for the budget, since he's going to adjust it after everything is ratified. Okay.
Go ahead, Commissioner Lynn. Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, let me express appreciation to the work, Bob, you do, the work that the MTA does, the work that Transit Authority and the commuter railroads do in terms of, I've been on the board for 6 months, and hearing the monthly reports of the improved work is extraordinary and it's terrific, and I want to compliment that. I also said earlier today, I want to commend the MTA and the transit unions on reaching a settlement. I was for a collaborative effort of people working together, of not bargaining in the press, but bargaining at the table, and reaching a settlement and a responsible settlement, and I applaud that occurred. Here's why this doesn't solve my problem with the financial plan. If you recall, when I spoke earlier, the labor agreement was only one element of the things I was concerned about, but let me speak about the labor agreement as you talked about. We have constantly, as a board, when we've had concerns about the capital plan or had concerns about Alex, we'd say, look, down the line we can handle that, don't worry. I think that is not a responsible approach. We now know, based on the email from Pat Foy, that the settlement costs more than is funded. We funded 2%, and we know that the net cost is about 2.3%. It doesn't sound like a lot, but over 4 years, that's 1.2%. If you assume that that's going to be applied to all of the workers, well over $100 million a year by the time you get to the end of the contract, that extra 1.2%, if you include fringes and pension costs and all the things that you need to budget for. I have to say that in my years with the city, in both the Koch administration and in the de Blasio administration, when we reached a tentative pattern settlement, we would, if we were in the middle of a financial plan process, we would amend immediately. Wouldn't wait. We would assume that this needs, we know we're not going to spend less than this. If the union doesn't ratify, I don't think we can assume the cost will be less. I don't think we can assume that the cost of the Long Island Railroad and Metro North will be less than this pattern deal. So the first thing is I think we have a responsibility. It's in front of us. We know these costs. We should be accommodating it in the financial plan. We're probably okay in the budget. I don't think because the contract is backloaded, there's probably not a severe budget issue in the first year, but by the very nature of backloading the labor costs, it means there are serious problems in the financial plan. And I think responsible budgeting requires doing what others have done, which I think may have been done here in the past, I don't know, but in terms of incorporating those costs. But if that were it alone, I could see a narrow conversation and say, look, maybe we should wait. But there are a lot of other things, and I note, Bob, that I think on page 272 of the exhibit book, you list again your concerns that you raised in November, and I think your concerns are similar to my concerns. One was the labor agreement. We now know more. To some extent, that should satisfy some of your concerns. This was not a wild labor agreement, and it is probably fundable down the line. But we need to understand how it's going to be fundable. The reducing fair revenue loss. I see things getting worse. And yet the budget assumes, the financial plan assumes 50 million of savings. The budget assumes savings from that. And we've had a lot of conversation about the 500 police officers. And I did say earlier today, the story of the 500 police officers is a little bit like manna from heaven. It first was going to solve fare evasion, then was going to solve homelessness, then was going to solve quality of life, then crime prevention, and now even terrorism. We have all sorts of things that we ascribe and we haven't seen, and I know that Commissioner Vanderpool has said a number of times, we haven't seen how these workers are going to be deployed, and I think we as directors, commissioners on the board should understand this. I have said a number of times, I think that the costing of the 249 million, or whatever that number is low, because I don't see any supervisors. I only see 500 police officers, and I think it's not possible that in the current department you have 20 to 30% of supervisors. I can't imagine 500 police officers without a number of supervisors that are not included, or if supervisors are going to be there, it means fewer than 500 police officers will be out there. There's no or very little accommodation for overtime. And I've said any number of times that the MTA police officers have the highest level of overtime of any workers, higher than Long Island Railroad. Alex Partner said $38,000 per year. Where are those costs in terms of the analysis of what this is going to cost? I think we have a fiduciary responsibility to understand these things before we vote on a financial plan. The controllable overtime, I see in your own numbers, that overtime is 57.4 million worse than planned, and yet we're assuming $50 million reduction each year in overtime. I don't think that is responsible unless we figure out how we're changing things. On the paratransit, you're assuming, and you've said that that is a risk that you're concerned about. I am too. 361 million, and the New York City, as I understand it, has not given any indication that they are willing to pay this at this point. And I want to get into the substance of what is right or wrong. I know that that's a $361 million hole that we have in front of us right now. The Alex Partner information is stuff that you yourself say is a substantial risk, and the budget reduction plans have problems. I would like to know a better certainty that we're going to make those and how we're going to do this. So I'm turning, as I said earlier, I couldn't help but reading at length the long New York Times obituary of Felix Roten. And I had to reflect of getting to New York City right after the fiscal crisis. I started working for the city in 1975. Soon after Ford said to the city, drop dead. At that time, you had Mayor Koch, you had Governor Hugh Carey, you had Donald Kummerfeld, who was chairman of the State Financial Control Board, you had Brigham as budget director, and you had Felix Roten, head of the Municipal Assistance Corporation. That they understood what was the dangers of not appropriately budgeting, not appropriately analyzing fiscal risks. I think that we are facing a very substantial set of fiscal problems that we talk about all the time, and I do not think it is responsible for us to adopt a financial plan that doesn't discuss, accommodate, and explain how we're going to solve all of these issues. So I said earlier, the lessons I learned after the city's fiscal crisis, and in honor of the life of Felix Roten, I feel an absolute necessity to vote no on this financial plan.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Vanderpool.
This would be my fourth budget vote, and Bob Foran always starts it the same way. Under statutory obligation, the MTA is required to have a balanced budget for the next year. And the question has actually came up last year. What happens if the MTA does not approve a balanced budget? But we now have the benefit of the state budget director on the board with us. So I'd like to put my fellow commissioner on the spot and ask you the question: what would the ramifications be if the MTA were not to adopt a balanced budget or adopt a budget by the end of this calendar year for 2020?
Yeah. I'm not going to speak to it because I don't know the exact laws, right? But under public authorities law, you have a requirement, they have a requirement to adopt a budget before the end of the year. I don't know that there's any enforcement mechanism behind it. The bond agencies would look negatively to that. I think they're looking at it right now. I think many of the questions that Commissioner Lynn raised, I had heard previously raised, and I thought I'd heard Bob answer many of them, throughout the discussion on the budget, over time. But there's a requirement to have a budget in place before that under the public authorities law reform. We can amend that budget at any time along the way. So it's not fixed, and actually it's never fixed. So those multiple amendments come up both on the operating side and the capital side. I think those things will be changed. And there are, out year gaps here, as there always have been. The requirement is for the 1 year to be balanced. And I give credit to Bob for each year having out year gaps, having managed to close those gaps every year consistently throughout your tenure here. So, I have some confidence that you'll be able to do that. And even with those risks, we'll have to figure it out. The state has stepped up, both on the operating side. We're talking about the, congestion pricing 1, but that's bringing in close to $400 million in annual operating funds for the agency as part of the subway action plan, and now is dealing with that, and then on the capital side. So I think that the requirement is, I know that the requirement is you have to put it in a balanced budget, adopt it before the 1st. Every public authority has that requirement. I believe this budget is balanced based on what's been presented here, but we can discuss that at the board meeting on Wednesday. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Thank you.
Why don't I get the Commissioner Zuckerman thing from? I'll just
It's
take
been a
Neil.
long day and not enough coffee.
Well,
probably.
we have lots of that. No, I'm just kidding around. I have 3 comments. I'll start with the most parochial, and I'll go to the most macro. Bob mentioned the elimination of a proposal related to those of us in the Metro North territory of a parking fee increase, and I appreciate most of the support of the board here in removing that. The budget and the plan in here, I should say the plan, not the budget, focuses on biennial fare increases. There is a point we're going to reach, especially those in the county I represent, and there's a reason why we have geographic representation where the absolute out-of-pocket costs are going to be untenable. Those in my area are paying $6,000 a year. 40% of them buy a Metro card. That's $7,500 a year on a per capita income before taxes of $42,000. I think many of you would agree that's getting to the point of being an extreme amount of money. And so while this budget does assume, and the number of people I represent and those in northern Westchester and Suffolk County are not a great population, so the absolute revenue is not of a huge impact. But we're going to have to be mindful that at some point you don't get blood from a stone. And I think we're starting to become a little Medusa-like solidified in my county and those further north and further east. So that's one point I want to make. So I'm just making a note for when we get here in about a year from now for the fair discussions. because you can't just keep raising it 4% every 2 years on those who are paying $7,500 a year. That's a lot of money. Second thing I want to mention is something we discussed a little bit in our Metro North Long Island Railroad meeting this morning. When we build nice and large and very attractive capital projects, we rarely talk about the operating expense we're taking on. A lot of respect to the Long Island Railroad team for reducing what had been a $250 million increase in our operating budget for East Side Access down to about $211. It's a big change in the cost structure. But take that, take Second Avenue Subway, as yet I don't think in this plan the 4-year costs eventually of the 4 stations in the Bronx and Penn Station access, but I don't know what that's going to be. Maybe that's going to be another $50 to $100 million in operating expense. But ladies and gentlemen, everything we build, you got to operate. And when the roof is leaking, and I'd say a $400 million deficit is a leak, adding on more wings to the house is challenging. Third point I want to make is I do appreciate, Bob, with the transformation plan that you've been helping to support, and the Alex Partners view, and Anthony McCord here now, and those of us who are committed to transformation. We went from having $1 billion deficit in 2022 in the plan to a $400 million deficit in 2023. So that's a major change. But ladies and gentlemen, it is not a switch we're going to just flip and get that money. Taking out 2,700 positions, the fare evasion reduction, the work that transformation will be is not going to just fall. It's not going to be, as my colleague Mr. Lynn said, manna from heaven. That's going to be hard-fought, hard work, and Anthony McCord is going to need all our support, and the couch will have to be quite deep to find all the nickels inside of it to be able to make up for that multi-$100 million cost takeout he's got to do. So I actually think our plan has got a lot of risk in it because I've done this many, many times. It is not easy to get that money out. And I want to applaud you, Bob, as Robert said, for all you've done year in, year out. But I think, as you've heard me say many times, you're getting close to bone. And so we're going to have to think about some more dramatic moves, both in the top line and the bottom line, to get the money out, because $426 million deficit's in this plan. But I will support it on Wednesday.
Commissioner Jones.
I apologize, Bob. I'm not sure. This may have been addressed. How much of this money in this year's budget are one-shots that are not recurring? What percentage are we talking about?
Sorry, okay. David Check, I think it's pay-as-you-go capital. It's somewhere around the $90 million between the July and November plan, and then it was the full $165 million of reserve.
That's correct, Bob.
So we've had very blunt discussions with the rating agencies and investors, and we've told them that for the last few years we have not had structural balance. We have continued to try to cut our expenses, as we've said. I think they are with us, they're behind us, they understand the challenges that we have. But I think they saw the evidence of both the city and the state's commitment on the capital program, which we all know that if we can make the kind of investments that we need to make on the capital program to modernize our system, that is where I think we're going to see some significant cost savings and efficiencies, because we now will not be trying to maintain old, decrepit equipment. We'll be able to avoid some of those investments. But I think we have to continue to prove to our funding partners and to our customers that we can cut cost out. And so the challenge that we presented to the rating agencies and to investors is that we are committed to continue to drive for cost reductions and efficiencies. And we believe that when we get to the point where we've proven to those, all the constituent groups, that we are doing that, and we're proving that we can accomplish it and to provide the reliable service that our customers need, I believe that then we can address the issue of additional annual recurring revenues. But until we've proven that we can really do it, it's a tough ask, particularly when they've given us so much in terms of support for the capital program. So.
Okay, I would just add one more. I mean, I'm not foolish enough to think that when you list like 10 things as reasons to vote against this thing that you're going to be swayed by one or two. But I just want to bring up two that I felt strongly about. One, on the labor agreement, I had some concerns at the beginning of this process too about the fact that if we end up with labor agreement that goes above what we've budgeted for? How do we fill that gap? And you and I had a really fruitful conversation about that, which is that my understanding of the process is the labor union votes to ratify the agreement towards the end of the month. The budget then comes back to the board. We are given options on how, so let's say for sake of round numbers, let's say we're off by $1 million, right? We are then brought options on how that $1 million hole will be filled. We do our job as our fiduciary responsibility as a board to provide feedback on how we feel about the $1 million hole being filled. If we don't like the options that Bob has brought us, we can then send him back for more options, and then eventually we vote as a board. And so that was how I was able to get comfortable on it. So I understand that, like, if you feel like you're moving forward on something where you don't have answers on how the hole is going to be filled, that would be one thing. But actually, the process is that we will be the senior leadership will come back to us for our views on how to fill that hole. So that, I think, is significant. Two, I feel like there's a lot of shock and awe about the paratransit request of the city. In my own conversations with the city, I have found the city to be quite accommodating and interested in finding a place where we can get to a better place on funding paratransit together. I know that the city is interested in coming to a conclusion that allows them to be in a better place financially on buses. But my conversations with the city have been completely calm, and there has been no outrage over the suggestion that the MTA and the city need to meet each other halfway or find a happy place in the middle on paratransit. So I just wanted to comment on those two because there's a lot of talk about both of those, and I just don't. I'm missing the. I'm missing what's keeping people from voting for this budget if it's about those two. Any other questions or comments? Sorry, Commissioner Lynn.
Yes. I believe if the city is, the $360 million hole is fairly substantial. If the city is going to come forth, we ought to hear what they're doing. You may have had your own conversations. Others of us have had other conversations. There's no question people want to solve paratransit issues. We heard this morning how important those issues are. But it is just not responsible, I don't believe, to be with that level of conversation, that informal conversation, to then be budgeting $360 million in a financial plan. The same, it's the reverse with the labor settlement. We know now what those dimensions are going to be. That's not an unknown. We know it's going to be at least the dimensions that Pat Foy set forth. We should be understanding how that fits in. And if that, again, I said before, if that alone were the issue, I probably would be more sympathetic to the issue. But I believe it is one of half a dozen, 8, 9, 10 items that are problematic. There was a conversation about East Side Access and the number of dollars that that's going to drain. There are a whole host of problems that I think it is our responsibility to have more of a handle on now as we do the financial plan.
So would you suggest that we put off the financial plan until there's resolution from the city and the MTA and paratransit and other issues?
Well, I'm not sure I'm certainly much more comfortable with this year's budget, where the budget, the labor agreement in this year's budget is basically loaded out of this year's budget into years 2, 3, and 4 of the labor agreement. That then leaves on the issue of paratransit about $50 million that you're accommodating for this year. I'd love to hear more. That is pretty imminent. That's in this next calendar year. You're expecting to get $50 million from the city. I then also must admit I have concerns. You're assuming in this coming year, I think, fare reduction of $50 million. You're assuming overtime reductions of $50 million. Those are another $100 million that I don't see a path to based on all the numbers that we looked at. We presented each month, we're presented, well, the reason why overtime is more is the subway action plan or this or that, but we see nothing moving in the other direction. And we're now in December. And to be assuming 50 million in each fare evasion and overtime for next year, and not seeing any good news in December, to me is frightening.
I'm just trying to figure out what the solution, though, is. Is the solution that we would move forward without a financial plan, or is the solution that we would assume until we have confirmations that we've actually reduced fare evasion by 50, we should just cut 50 elsewhere?
So my view would be that, first of all, it is December 15th, that perhaps there is more that could be done over the next 2 weeks in terms of putting meat on the bone as to what the plans are. And then if there is an approach that just looks at the budget and separates out the financial plan for discussion later on, there'll be a ratification of the contract. I hope before by the end of the month there will be more discussions with the city. Perhaps the answer is then to separate them if that's feasible. I don't know what the requirements are.
Commissioner Zuckman.
I mean, I do think there is some real merit to what you're proposing, Sarah, to separate the two. What I don't really understand, Bob, maybe you provide some input, is what is the weight or the assessment and the usage of the financial plan outside of our organization? Budget clearly is adopted to tell people how to spend and the envelope of said spend. But the plan itself has what role or plays what roles?
It's the forward projections, the forecasting. What are we anticipating? If we only presented 1 year at a time, then people would say, are there no surprises? And what we're trying to tell people is we've anticipated things. You have properly mentioned several times about the East Side access cost. Well, our financial plan includes all of those East Side access costs. So we have been building into our financial plans the operating cost for these mega projects. Okay, so no one should be surprised when that happens, and the rating agencies see it and investors see it. So that's the benefit. Now, again, it is just a series of assumptions, okay? And so we can know they're going to be better, they can be worse, but they are assumptions. But what it does help focus is it drives us toward, I think, a relentless cost reduction program, efficiencies. And what I really appreciate about the transformation that was put to us by the legislature and by the executive and incorporated into the Alex partners is this is for the first time giving us a chance to achieve savings that we couldn't when we had silo operations. We couldn't achieve savings with silos. Now we're being forced to bring all of these back office support functions together, and I know we'll achieve savings. We will achieve savings that otherwise would not be achievable. So what it does is it helps focus us on a longer term strategy of achieving efficiencies and making the right kind of investments.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay. David, do we go back to you for the final
Yes,
two?
yes, you do. Next are MTHQ and all agency items. The first, we have Patrick Warren, who will give a brief update on fare evasion mitigation strategies. He will be followed by Susan Doring from Metro North, Mark Young from Long Island Railroad, and Aaron Stern and Judy McLean from New York City Transit, who will each give short updates on fare evasion. The fare evasion report begins on page 55.
Good afternoon. So on fare evasion, a lot has gone on in the last month or so as we've gotten the first assessments back in from the first few months that we did the program. So what we've done, we have a two-pronged approach that we're going into now in terms of looking at the fare evasion problem. One is looking at, as has been brought up several times here, the $50 million and how do we come up with that number here in the future. So what we've done is we've done a more tactical approach to, we looked at all the locations out there where fare evasion is estimated at and what the costs are annually, and we've done a more focused effort and a more contracted effort on trying to go after fare evasion at those particular locations. Further, we've looked at the times of day with data that we've taken off of video camera footage and figuring out when those peak periods are. And they're not always during rush hour. Sometimes they're from like 9 o'clock at night till 1 in the morning so that we can focus in on those areas. Another area that we're looking at in terms of fare evasion is the MVM machine and swiper damage that's out there. That's about a $30 to $40 million cost every year, and so we have a focused effort looking at trying to gain back some of those monies by policing those areas. So so by looking at this tactical effort at where fare evasion occurs and applying the resources, in this case police forces, to those locations, we are pretty confident that we will be able to get to the number of $50 million annually. That's sort of the short-term approach. The long-term approach is we continue to do through our marketing strategy as well as through policing across the entire network, but mostly in the top 50 stations, to try to change behaviors in the city, which is more of a long-term strategy to get those numbers down. So that's what we're looking at right now. In general, though, in terms of the numbers, so we've talked about methodology a couple times here, and we have some folks here that can go into a little bit detail. But as you all know, that this summer we amended the methodology a little bit. We've added more counters. We've put more rigor into the process, as well as we did change some of the formulas, and I'll ask Judy McClain to talk about that a little bit. But so we end up being sort of re-baselined this summer. So we try to not, as we try to look at what happened last year and this year, if you look at the numbers from last year, this time last year, of course, they're up a few percentage points. But it's looking at a little bit apples and oranges compared to, since we changed the methodology this summer, and we re-benchmarked ourselves. So we're taking a shorter term approach right now, looking at what the progress we've had since we re-benchmarked, which is in August, to now, and we've seen we're starting to see the trend start to go in the right direction. So we still have to do more analysis on that. There's a margin of error in there, but we're starting to see improvement in that area, which is good news. So with that, let me just add Judy, if there's something that she can add, or would you please add on methodology?
I know earlier today there was some, it seems kind of counterintuitive, because you see that fare evasion on the subway has gone up, and we stated that was due to changes in monitoring, and yet on the bus side, fare evasion went down, and we said the same thing. And I think there's a difference. I just want to explain why that might be the case. So we did increase the number of surveys that we do, the supervision. We also changed some of the methodology. And we also clarified some of the fare control areas and limited them to make the counts more accurate. This is work that we did in conjunction with the IG's office. But on the subway side, basically the checkers just count the people evading the fare. And then we rely on AFC data from MetroCard to compare that against. On the bus side, it's a little bit different. Because we don't have the same kind of AFC data, it's in 6-minute increments. The bus moves, stops. So what we do is we have the checkers actually count the number of people evading the fare and the number of people that are paying their fare. So on the bus side, both counts are more accurate. And that's why we think the trend, the effect may be less. But I just want to clarify that all of the work, all of the checking that we do, these are samples. There is a margin of error, and it is always a sample. We are moving in the direction to get better information by using automatic passenger counters on the buses so that we get better information. And with Omni, we should be able to get better information. We can have proof of payment. So I think that we have to keep in mind that this is a sample and there is some variant there. So it's important to monitor this and look for trends, but there is a margin of error.
Let me just say one other comment before we go to, is that two things. One is that, first of all, we are, as much as it doesn't sound that way, we're best in class in this particular area of looking at counting and figuring out what our losses are. Almost no other transit agency does it, and the few that do have a very weak system at doing it. So, and we're trying to get better at it. So, right now we've have the help of a Columbia University professor and her staff, and are looking at our methodology and determining whether it is as good as it can be or it can be better. And so that effort is going on right now so that we get to a better place in that regard. So, Chair.
Commissioner Lynn.
Just looking at your page 60 of the report, I see that for calendar 19, October year to date, subway fare evasion is 4.9%, and in 18 was 3.2. I understand some of that may be through rebalancing or through looking at it, and the bus number was 18.4 last year and is now 20.7, both moving in clearly not a good direction.
Right.
I'm wondering, in your financial plan and your budget and financial plan that's being assumed, what is the percentage of the bus fare evasion for the year and the bus and subway evasion that's necessary to meet the numbers in your financial plan? What percentage?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't know if you got the answer down there, but
So one way to think about it is that the additional 50 million is approximately equivalent to about 1% of the ridership. So our paid ridership needs to increase by 1% by converting evaders to paid riders to realize the additional 50 million that we've added based on our, the improvement in enforcement. In terms of the way the budget is put together, the budget for ridership and revenue does not explicitly assume a specific level of fare evasion. And the reason for that is, as Judy has said, these are estimated numbers. These are samples that have a significant error of margin. We're trying to get better, but the system was never intended to be a precise budgeting tool. So the way we construct the budget for ridership and revenue is based on the paid ridership. That is not an estimate. That is an enumeration, an exact count. And therefore, it is highly reliable. So when we do an estimate for the annual ridership and the annual revenue, it is based on the real numbers that are being counted and collected every month, and then there's a forecast going forward.
So if riders go up significantly and fare evasion goes up not quite as much, that would count towards making this target. And that, to me, is not a level of specificity that I think we should be looking at. We should be separating out this issue and having a plan on this issue. And of course it gets more complex when obviously everyone wants ridership to go up. Also, everyone wants ridership wants fare evasion to go down. And I think we've been talking now, since I've gotten here, on fare evasion, what we're doing about fare evasion, and there should be a separate answer to know, based on our current methodology, if it's now 4.9% is the fare evasion, we're intending to get that down to 4.0, making that up. And unless we get down to 4.0, we've failed on that. That's the approach that I would want to take going forward.
Well, then we'll never get there unless we're counting every single person that comes through on every bus and comes through every turnstile, which is, I mean, like if that can be a position, that is a reasonable position to have. Well, I think there are other people on the board who believe that we're making a lot of progress in getting there. I'm just saying it's another view to decide that you will never know the 100% precise number unless you count every single person. And I'm just saying I get it, but I just don't think we're going to get there.
You're misunderstanding me. I'm saying if we believe the 4.9% is accurate, however it's done, and I understand there's a plus and minus. 4.9 may be 4.7 versus 5.2. I understand there's a range. I want to know what we're aiming to do. Where do we want to be 12 months from now to say yes, we've succeeded? And I haven't seen that or heard that. I'm not saying there needs to be exact specificity. Quite the opposite. I think it is wrong to think there could be an exact specificity. I want to know, though, however we're measuring it, what is the objective we're trying to get to, and how do we see that we got there?
So we agree with what you just said, that we do expect the measured fare evasion rate to go down significantly. If we are going to achieve 50 million of additional revenue from reduced fare evasion, then absolutely we should see a much lower fare evasion rate. We're simply cautioning that the current numbers are somewhat in flux as this new methodology is phased in. And so trying to pin down what the exact number is right this moment is a difficult ask. But we all agree that as the new methodology is phased in and we accumulate additional months of real information, it will stabilize to what we can agree is a reliable range of what it really is, and that going forward, we should see reductions to that level.
Commissioner Albert?
Yeah, I see it every day, every time I travel. I see it in a different method almost every time I travel, and I'm just wondering how the counting is being done. Is it being done at attended and non-attended entrances? Is it being done at turnstiles and slam gates? Is it being done on inbound and outbound sides? Is it being done on weekends and weekdays? Rush versus non-rush? Are you checking when it's being done? Is just somebody just running through the slam gate because they're late for their train and the train is in the station? Are the MVMs not working? We really need to know a lot of these things before we know if it's really an accurate count.
So it is done 7 days a week. I'm focusing on subway now, 7 days a week. It's done, fare control areas are broken down into locations where a person can see the slam gates, a certain number of turnstiles that they can count. And they count whether they're going through the slam gate, jumping over a turnstile, so what we do is we do kind of a randomized sample. Then we do what we call cluster sampling. A fare array is a cluster.
Sorry to interrupt you, Judy,
Sure.
but are locations you sample repeated at another time?
Yes, it's a randomized thing. So it's randomized by location, randomized by time of day, day of the week. And that's some of the things that we changed, was that we increased the number of samples.
Attended, non-attended?
Both.
And the folks are in plain clothes, yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Commissioner Vanderpool.
I have two questions about fare evasion. So I understand why and how the methodology has changed, but it appears as if we're still comparing results with the new methodology against the results of the old methodology, and that seems faulty.
So you're correct. So we're showing you the data that we have, but you're absolutely right. Really comparing how we're doing the count right now to how we did it last year is not a fair count. That's why I said we're starting from August right now going forward, and depending on what comes out of this work with the university professor, we may adjust it again, which comes at risk, as you can imagine, but to try to get to a better spot, but you're spot on.
And then my second question is, so I'm actually not one of the board members who thinks that we're seeing progress in fare evasion, and I'd like to understand why that is. So we've already had a reassignment of officers in the system, different from the conversation we've been having for a few months now about additional enforcement. So, just looking at these numbers, and we've just touched on them, so I understand there's variables here, but, Metro North, quarter to quarter, third quarter to third quarter, it's a 0.4% decrease in fare evasion. Again, I understand these numbers are still somewhat, they're changing. I guess rather than go through each of the agencies, because we have the numbers here, why aren't we seeing bigger reductions in fare evasion?
So I think one of the, probably the most primary answer is that we really started this program last summer, and the statistics don't go out to October. So it really has only had about 90 full days of actual fare evasion work that are going into these numbers. So we need a little bit of time to get a good assessment of what's going on there. So I think that's really the primary thing. So we really have since August, really a full-blown effort on fare evasion, and we've even, based on what I described earlier, now going to do a little bit more focus on areas that are of larger gain in terms of trying to get revenues, and back's not the right word, but improve, deter fare evasion.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please. Please.
Not at all. Thank
Yeah.
you, David.
Sorry.
Just a follow-up to that, Patrick. So I think you heard my comments in an earlier committee where I talked about needing a strategy for deployment of resources, and as part of, perhaps should be a priority of this task force. And for the, I think you just further elucidated that point of mine, why we need a strategy for how these resources are going to be deployed. And I know that that's in progress, but we needed it already. We'll have it going forward. But I think we should be, I'm just surprised that we're not seeing more significant reductions.
Yeah, you mentioned, Patrick, 50 stations. I assume those are subway stations.
Correct. There's 50 subway stations and 50 bus lines too.
Okay, so you say you identified those. Can we as a board see where those stations are?
I certainly would can provide that information to you, but it's one of those things that we don't want everybody to know where we're going so that they don't avoid it.
This was the argument I heard about international terrorists
I
actually
think they
writing
were-
down stations.
I thought they were shared. I actually think
These
they were
haven't
shared.
been. I haven't seen that. No.
Okay, we'll
And
reaffirm. I think they've been shared.
My interest, however, is that I hope we don't seem to constantly, despite the numbers and where we're hemorrhaging money, seem to default on subways and avoid the question of bus lines in Staten Island and in parts of the Bronx that are the real hemorrhage points. So I just don't want to recreate. We have an image in our minds, I don't, others, of what fare evasion looks like in the city of New York. And it's not little old ladies on buses or the East Side person who decides not to pay a fare trying to get from all the way on the East Side, to catch a whatever in the middle. This whole process is just fraught with the issue of, are we really going where the real points of a problem are, or are we going with our assumptions about who is involved in fare evasion?
So it's the first one. We are, first of all, more of our assets are currently on buses than are in the subway in terms of that are looking primarily at fare evasion, and we are looking at where the losses are, and based on the information that we get from the folks that are doing the counting.
Pat, do you want to just talk through what we're doing on buses, to David's point?
So I'm not quite sure what you're saying.
The Eagle teams?
Okay, so right now what goes on with buses is we have primarily two groups of types of officers that go out there. One is our bridge and tunnel officer, peace officers that are in uniform and they go on the buses and and by and large, the police officers almost solely out there, when they're in uniform, that is a deterrent unto itself. They don't, nobody fare evades in front of them when they're on there. So when they're on the buses, et cetera, or we're on the subway station for that matter, they don't fare evade. And we gave you some anecdotal evidence to that previously. Additionally, we have the Eagle Team agents. They're not officers, but they're agents, and they're authorized to give some, but they're in plain clothes. And they were originally used on the SBS system, but now we have a contingent of them that also works hand in hand with the bridge and tunnel officers, BTOs. And they intermix on these buses to be that other part of the deterrent. In other words, you don't really know if there's going to be an officer on the bus or somebody to give you a summons on the bus. So primary effort is, the largest force is the ones that are in uniform, but there is a contingent out there that is in plain clothes that can issue a summons. Again, our goal is not to issue summons. That's not what we want to do. We just want people to pay their fare, and that's why most of the people are in uniform.
With regards to our efforts on the bus system, in June, prior to the discussion of the July financial plan, there was some discussion had around changes to the number of Eagle team, and it was to be reduced. And there was a number of commissioners, myself included, who were asking more questions about that. And we were told, well, it's not so much that we're reducing the numbers, we're sort of redeploying them. Bob, can you just, because my memory is a little fuzzy, can you just remind me what action was taken 6 months ago with regards to that, and how that is reconciled with what Patrick is talking about now? So did we reduce, do this redeployment, and are now working with that existing team? Have we added new Eagle teams? I'm a bit confused.
So we have not reduced, and we've not added Eagle team, other than plus or minus through attrition, that kind of stuff. But no, we haven't changed them. We've just modified where they're serving. So they were primarily on SBS systems, and now they're both on local bus and SBS.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, now are we going to go to Metro North and Long Island Railroad?
Yeah, that's what I was going to suggest, since we really hit subway and bus.
Yep.
We have Sue Doring, and we have Mark Young here for Metro North and Long Island Railroad.
Good afternoon. As mentioned in previous monthly reports, Metro North and MTA Audit continue to work closely together to address the results of the MTA Audit Onboard Revenue Compliance Program with comprehensive review and follow-up actions by Metro North transportation managers. At Metro North in November, MTA Audit conducted 518 total tests over the course of 386 train rides. Metro North's fare not collected rate was 3.6%, down from 4.6% in October. Year-to-date, fare not collected is 4.0%. Fare not collected represents 2.1% of total revenue year-to-date through the end of November. That's about $14.2 million. Annualized, that's 15.5. Metro North's incorrect fare rate in November was 12.9%, down from 16.4% last month. Incorrect fares are 15.7% year-to-date. Revenue loss associated with this test is estimated to be approximately 0.18% of total revenue year-to-date. That's about $1.2 million. Annualized, that's $1.3 million. As mentioned in my previous reports, each month Metro North's transportation managers investigate each one of these exceptions identified in the audits and responds to MTA audit within 5 days of receipt of the audit results. All employees identified in a failed audit are re-instructed. Repeat instances of noncompliance are followed up with discipline. There was one repeat instance in November. Additionally, transportation managers performed follow-up inspections of all employees identified in these missed fare incidents to ensure future compliance, and in November there were no exceptions to any of those follow-up inspections. Lastly, Metro North has recently reached out to MTA Audit to explore the use of MTA Audit software in identifying e-tics purchasing, refund and activation trends, anomalies, and potential misuse of this ticketing tool.
And for Long Island Railroad, same program as Metro North. I'll just recite the statistics. So in the month of November, our fare not collected rate was 4.1%, which is our third lowest of the year. Year to date, our fare not collected rate is 5.2%, which is significantly less than the 6.9% year to date last year. Again, we believe this is due to a lot of management focus on making sure we have our extra collectors in the correct place, on the right trains at the right time to address problem areas. Similarly, our incorrect fare collected rate has gone down year to date. It is 16.8%. Last year it was 19.2%. On a monthly basis, we calculate on an annual projection basis how much we lose due to fare evasion. Our estimate, based on the figures we have so far this year, the total is estimated $30 million, which is $6 million less than the same period last year. So that's sort of the financial impact we see from the positive results thus far this year. The only other thing I'll mention is a few times we've talked about a separate type of fare evasion, which is credit card fraud, which takes place at our ticket vending machines, which is essentially identity theft. This past month, all the full-service machines at the Long Island Railroad were outfitted with new credit card chip readers, which starting this month essentially transfers all financial liability for credit card fraud from the railroad to the credit card company. So the past year, that was estimated to cost the Long Island Railroad $3 million, and that's a financial liability that is now being transferred off of the railroad books and onto the credit card company.
Commissioner Herman.
Thank you. Sorry, Metro North. It appears, since we've been talking about fare not collected rates and trying to stop fare evasion, that Metro North is going in the wrong direction. Can you speak to why it seems to be you're going up and not down? From the year to date, 2018 it was 2.9, and 2019 is 4%. And then monthly was, November was 2.3, and November is 3.6.
It's a tough question, frankly. A lot of what we're looking at in terms of fare not collected has a lot to do with the operation of the train and the experience that the conductors are having getting through the train. One of the challenges is if there's any incidents that are going on or operational changes in terms of stopping patterns, in terms of crowded conditions, things like that. Areas where I have seen in the individual reports that we've had with crowding, particularly Yankee games and things of that nature, is where we find that we get the most of the fare not collected exceptions, when there's specific operational incidents that affect the conductor's ability to get through the train.
Are we seeing more of that this year than we did last year?
Well, we do have a lot of crowded conditions on our trains. As you know, we have a lot of work that's going on. We do have a lot of standee conditions on our trains. The Harlem line, we're seeing that more because of the work that's going on the Harlem line and the schedules that we have in place. New Haven line, similarly, we have very, very high ridership, and that does create some challenges for us as well.
I was going to note the same statistics that Rhonda talked about. I do want to ask this. If Long Island Railroad sees a savings of $6 million, what is the Metro North loss in terms of moving from 2.9 to 4.0 and on incorrect fare collected going from 13.6 to 15.7?
I don't have the number from last year handy. Just give me a second.
Okay. Perhaps also you should benchmark the Long Island Railroad approach, and maybe that's we could learn something from that.
While they're thinking, that one of the things that we've been doing for the last few months is just that. We've been trying to make sure that we share those kinds of tactics and techniques so that we are employing them at whatever the best lessons learned are.
I'll have to get you that variance. I don't have that with me.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, team. Sure.
Another reason that our error rate may be going higher is that when we did the incorrect fare analysis, we basically, that's basically people on peak trains who aren't paying the step up. We basically doubled up our testing on the peak trains. So as a result of doubling up our testing on the peak trains, I believe on the short term, we've probably increased our error rate, only because we're doing more of that equivalent testing. So I think that's part of it, and I think in the longer run, we hope to see that go down.
Thank you. Should we go to the Finance Committee charter?
Yes, at last month's meeting, the Finance Committee charter was presented to this committee for review. There were no recommended changes, and it will be presented at the Governance Committee later today. Next is David Ross with procurements of both headquarters and the agencies.
Thank you, David. MTA headquarters has 20 procurement actions totaling $26,815,000, and all of them are competitively procured. 19 actions are contracts with vendors that will be included on panels with between 5 and 9 vendors that will be available to provide management consulting services in each of the 9 subject matter categories. Task awards will be assigned as needs arise through competition among vendors with contracts in the applicable categories. The combined estimated values for these 5-year contracts is $25 million, and of course, they'll only be used on an as-needed basis. There's no guarantee of any amount for any of the vendors. It's work as required. The last action for headquarters is an $1,815,000 award to artist Nikki Cave to design, fabricate, and install permanent artwork at the Times Square shuttle station and passageway. This item replaces an action previously approved by the board. It provides for a significant extension of the art installation, including a new passageway, and allows for an alternative approach that mitigates construction risk and customer impact.
Okay, let's start with questions. On the 1.815 award to the artist, I'm sorry, is that procurement an effort to, because it ends with mitigate construction risk and customer impact, is that $1.8 million to protect customers and to improve safety, or is that actually $1.8 million?
That's the full cost of the art installation. It pays for the artist and the installation of all of the artwork. So it's paying the artist and for the installation of the artwork throughout the passageway and platform.
Chair, if I may.
Please.
So this is a result of a pretty complicated change that took place in the plan for the Times Square shuttle 6 or 9 months ago when we started to re-examine it. It was originally planned to be a one-track operation. In the end, we decided that that wasn't going to work for the customers during a long period of construction. We came up with a plan for a 2-track operation. Part of that was we had to redesign, it gets a little technical, we had to redesign the whole project physically, including, and we ended up with a connection that was a little different to the 6th Avenue station than the one had been contemplated that was going to be effectuated by the Durst organization as part of a long-standing real estate agreement. So the result was we made a deal with the Durst organization. Instead of them doing all that work, they're paying in an amount of money, which is, I believe,
1.2 million.
6, what?
I have, it's 1.2 million comes from this $7.5 million settlement.
Right, but the settlement is, I should know this off the cuff, but I believe it's $6 million?
7.5.
$9 million. So we made a settlement with the Durst organization. We ended up with a passageway to 6th Avenue, which is a benefit to the system that we're going to be building, and we needed to design that passageway. The result was that we took advantage of what had been a successful artistic selection by our MTA Arts and Design Group for a first-class mosaic art, and as part of solving this entire rigmarole was to extend that art design plan to that passageway. And part of the rationale for having a significant piece of art there, frankly, is that we want people to come and use that passageway. We don't want it to be an underutilized kind of empty passageway in the system. So I think it's a win-win-win. It's become economically a better deal. We got a 2-track operation during a very challenging period of construction instead of a 1-track shuttle operation. It's going forward. It's very busy, but it is operating successfully. And we have this new connection, which will be done with taking advantage of a first-class artist selection that had already taken place.
Anyone? Mr. Zuckerman.
I'm going to recuse myself from item number 1-19. My firm, of which I'm a member and an equity owner, is one of the listed firms, so I am so noting my recusal and the rationale for.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, we need a motion. Second? All in favor? Opposed? Carries, thank you. David Ross for Metro North.
Sure. Metro North has one procurement action totaling $10,417,500. It's a competitive design build award to John Savetta and Sons for the design and construction of a new 3rd Avenue bridge located over the New Haven line in Mount Vernon.
Any questions? Motion? Second? All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. David?
Long Island Railroad has one procurement action for an estimated $2.3 billion to establish a panel of 105 consultant firms that will be available to perform as-needed engineering, construction, supervision, inspection services, and miscellaneous construction-related professional services to support the 2020 to 2024 capital program and operating needs for all the agencies.
Questions, comments? Motion? Second? All in favor? Opposed?
Abstain. There's a handful of engineering firms on that list of 105 firms that are members of the LIA, so I will abstain like I did in the Long Island Railroad Committee meeting this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
New York City Transit has two procurement actions. They're competitive awards to Novabus, a division of Prevost Car, for $359,583,342, and to New Flyer of America for $241,611,735 to furnish and deliver 275 low-floor 40-foot diesel electric hybrid buses with an option to purchase up to 558 additional buses.
Questions or comments? Motion? Second? All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. David, Bridges and Tunnels?
There are no actions for bridges and tunnels, nor are there any actions for FEMTAC. That concludes for procurements. Back to David Keller.
MTA consolidated reports are on pages 90 through 149, and next is David Florio with real estate.
Real estate agenda is on page 150 of your book. There are 6 action items before you. The first is a renewal of the Rite Aid lease for their space in Grand Central Terminal. The next 4 items are for New York City Transit. The first 2 are 3 retail locations at 2 stations, 5th Avenue and 53rd, and the Chambers Street station on the 7th Avenue line. The last 2 transit items are renewals of existing fiber optic licenses, and the last item is an amendment for additional parking space for the legislative office in Albany. Happy to answer any questions, and these are the information items.
Thank you. Questions? Commissioner Albert?
It's not a question, but you might
Comment.
want to revise this so that it says fiber optic instead of fiber potic.
So acknowledged. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Vanderpool?
Not related to real estate, but what is the last page of our committee book? This
A year ago, we instituted a recycling program at 2 Broadway. And as you can see, in June of this year, the amount of recyclables exceeded the amount of non-recyclables. And it's been a very successful program thus far. And we're hoping to increase it, to roll this out at other facilities we manage as well. Thanks for acknowledging that.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Motion? Second? Come on, folks. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. David?
That concludes all the agenda items for finance.
Thank you. We need a motion to adjourn. Second? Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.